Good morning. Welcome to everybody. Welcome to this session of Smart Cities, Smarter Citizens. Probably if we want smart cities, we need smart citizens. And one of important question is always finding answers, but more than finding answers, finding the right questions changes the direction of research and changes the direction of the industry. Here I'm the privilege to introduce you Professor Beth Simone Noveck. She is one of these persons who found the right questions, the questions that opened new horizons in research. How to involve citizens in government and how to solve this thing of more and more complex policies by involving citizens. Professor Noveck is a professor in NYU in New York, is the director of the government lab, and wrote a book that just came out, the Smart Citizens, Smarter State, that we truly recommend to you. Professor, it's a privilege to have you. Thank you.
Oh, we have no time on the clock. Good morning. Good morning. It's really a pleasure to be here, and it's so exciting to be part of this incredible expo on the future of cities and the future of our communities. Obviously, we're going to hear a lot and have been hearing a lot about the way in which data and new technology is helping us to create cities that are both more innovative, there we go, that are more innovative thanks to the prevalence of new technology, from Internet of Things to sensors embedded in all of our built environment and lived environment, that are allowing us to use data, big data, small data, and open data to create government and deliver services that's more evidence-based and that's more intelligent. Data is a huge part of the story that we're going to be hearing, but it's not the only part of the story that I want to talk about today. It is, however, very clear that when we have more data, as is the case, for example, in Mexico, where the government has set up in the region, especially of Hidalgo, a website by the name of Mejora tu Escuelas, where they're able to pinpoint the fact, thanks to the availability of data, that over 1,400 teachers on the payroll all suspiciously have the same birthday, and all are suspiciously 112 years old, and all, even more suspiciously, are making more money than the president of Mexico, despite the failing statistics of their schools. When we have the data to reflect back to us the performance of our institutions, we can obviously improve them. Because data helps us to spot the problems, right? It helps us to know, as is the case in Christchurch, New Zealand, after the terrible and devastating earthquakes, when they were able to gather data not just from the government, but also from the utility companies, which buildings are inhabited and which ones are not, thereby knowing what could be demolished, what could be restored, and how to rebuild. In Singapore, beginning in 2013, the Environmental Ministry was started to use data to spot both the incidence of dengue fever, but also the breeding grounds for mosquitoes, and to mash up that data to find out where is the greatest risk, where are the hot spots for disease in order to prevent it. Ultimately, what we can do better with data is not just spot the problems, but obviously to solve them. In New York City, one of the tremendous challenges, as in many cities, has been the existence of cheap, illegal apartments, often housing immigrants, that create a dangerous risk of fire. An illegal apartment runs the risk 15 times greater than another fire of killing a fireman. So it was with great alacrity that the city began, when it appointed its first chief analytics officer a few years ago, its chief big data officer, to start to mash up large quantities of data to try to find out where those illegal apartments are. You can't do it only with complaints, because what are the complaints? As soon as you see one rat in a rich neighborhood, there are a lot of complaints, but it doesn't mean that's the greatest risk of fire. So instead, they used a large quantity of different data sets and were able to increase enforcement from a 13% rate to a 70% rate, saving the lives of the people who live in the apartments, saving the lives of the firemen who have to go into those apartments. When we have data, it obviously allows government to make better decisions, but it allows each of us to make better decisions. That data can come from a lot of sources. Sometimes it comes from the city, but sometimes it comes from us. When we're contributing data to medical, clinical trials, to health studies, using our Apple Research Kit with our iPhone, Or beginning last week, the Cornell University announced its new research stack, the ability to use your Android phone to sign up for a medical trial, contribute data about your own behavior, and help you to make healthier eating choices and better decisions about your own health and the health of your community. Data gives us the ability not only to make better decisions for ourselves, but also for our businesses. So in New York City, for example, the Business Atlas is making open data available to small businesses, not just big industries that know how to process big data, but to the jewelry store and the restaurant and the small business owner who might want to know where to put their business. So you can now look up on the Business Atlas who lives in a neighborhood, how much foot traffic is there, who's likely to buy your products. The policies that are driving this are clear. It's not just about the technologies of big data, it's obviously about the policy of open data, greater accessibility of data from government, but also sometimes what we might call data collaboratives. That is greater accessibility of data from businesses and from companies. Remember that Christchurch example. The best way to know who was living in houses was not the data that government held, it was data held by the power companies and utilities. It's often companies that sit on the best and most useful information, which when contributed back and combined with data from government, can be useful for solving hard problems. To do that, though, we need the policies, we need the governance structure, we need the trusted frameworks that allow us to share data appropriately, respectful of civil liberties, respectful of privacy, respectful of security, but at the same time allowing access to data between government agencies, with citizens, with researchers, in new ways that allow us to solve problems. But data is only half the story for how we create smarter, better, more intelligent cities. Obviously, the important part of the story is not simply the tools and technologies we create for citizens, but the ability to make cities smarter thanks to citizens. For the greatest asset we have in our cities is our citizens, the human capital, intelligence, and expertise that we have in our communities. This is why Bill Gates this year in his annual letter called for the creation of a global database of citizens to combat poverty. We should be tracking what people know, what they can do, and the skills that they can contribute to solve our hardest problems. For intelligence, expertise, and know-how is not limited to voting at the polling booth once a year. It's widely distributed in society, and it goes beyond the diplomas and degrees that we might have to include the lived experience, the skills, the credentials that we now, thanks to technology, have the ability to tap into, allowing us to leverage human expertise, I should say, to use technology to leverage human expertise in ways that we have not been able to do before. So we know lots of stories of cities who are beginning to reach out to citizens, whether it's Bangalore asking citizens for good ideas, or I just heard today from our friends in Quito, Ecuador, who reached out to citizens who said, you know what, Quito is too steep. It's 3,000 meters you have to climb, so we'd really like to have an escalator to get to the park. A good idea which government listened and heard and is beginning to implement. And in the United States, we're doing this systematically. The federal government has a platform called challenge.gov, where 450 government agencies over the last 5 years have put out prize-back challenges. They've offered a t-shirt, a chance to meet the president, $1 million, for asking citizens to solve hard problems. These aren't simple things like, design a t-shirt or come up with a cute video. These are problems like, how do I remove the salt from seawater to improve farming in developing world economies? Because citizens can contribute back to this process. Companies like Waze, owned by Google, are combining government data, obviously, with data contributed by citizens, taxi drivers, etc., to make better decisions and better informed decisions about traffic management and planning. New kinds of spaces are obviously making this possible. Whether it's the Social Innovation Lab in places like Amsterdam that you see here, the Fab Labs that are now proliferating all around Barcelona. These spaces are, in many cases, set up by citizens for citizens, but increasingly in the movement of public labs around the world, also being set up by government in an effort to tap into these good ideas from citizens. But let me say that the only way we are going to be able to make use of citizen expertise effectively and at scale, the only way we're going to be able to transform how we govern to take advantage of the crowdsourcing and citizen engagement and citizen participation that we all know is possible, the way that we're going to get at this expertise is not simply by having an open call. It's great that on challenge.gov I can put up a challenge and say, does anybody know how to remove the salt from seawater? Or does anyone out there have a solution to decrease the gap between the number of words heard by a rich child and a small child by the time they're 5? 30 million words is the gap. What we need is to use new technology, particularly new data-rich technologies, for matching people with the right skills to the opportunity to serve. We need essentially to take what we do for Tinder or Match.com or OkCupid or choose your favorite one and create Tinder for government. And by that I mean, and I'm only half joking here, is that we need to create this match, we need to marry people, we need to create this dating platform, if you will, that allow us to know what people can do and contribute so that they have the opportunity to give back in ways that speak to their expertise. We're all familiar with LinkedIn, of course. It's the most obvious of these examples that allows us to get at and know more and search for what people know in the hope that when we have a question about traffic congestion, we can more quickly find the engineers, we can more quickly find the people who have urban planning experience in our communities and make use of what they know. But it's going beyond the LinkedIns to new kinds of tools. For example, digital badges, now in use in many cities and across many platforms, little digital indicia, indicators that show what courses we've taken, what skills we've earned. You know about these because employers are seeking increasingly to make use of these to find the right employees. We can use them better in the public sector and in the public world to get at what citizens know. It goes beyond credentials. It's not just about where you got your degree, which you can find easily on LinkedIn. This is the platform Wisdom Bank in the county of Torfaen in Wales, which is indexing the skills and talents of its own citizens so that they can connect people to one another, to businesses, and to government officials for training and learning to improve the level of wisdom in their own community. It's about tools that help us not only to know what citizens know, but to know what people within the civil service know. Within cities, within states, within governments, we tend to have titles like director and manager and deputy director, which tell you almost nothing about what someone can do and contribute. This is why at the GovLab we're working with collaborators in 8 different countries to build a tool called the Network of Innovators to index the innovative capacity of civil servants around the world to better be able to connect people for mutual learning. At the World Bank, for example, they have built and rolled out this year a platform called Skill Finder, indexing the skills of 26,000 employees, alumni, and other consultants to the World Bank, again to be able to create new kinds of teams and match people for opportunities for solving problems. In São Paulo, just this last week, they again use this kind of matching ability to connect civil servants and citizens with skills to roll out 24 new public training courses, allowing people to learn from one another, again tapping into the skills of smart citizens to help build a smarter, more innovative city. But it's obviously not just about civil servants, it's obviously about what we can do with citizens. Here in Spain, Podemos, the political party, has taken a baby step towards beginning to indexing the skills of their followers and their members. It's not yet publicly available, it's used internally, but as a way again of trying to do this kind of targeted matching. Because ultimately we're going within our cities to be able to find the skills of our smart citizens, to leverage that human capacity. If we think about going beyond the open call, if we think about going beyond mass-based engagement, whether it's the voting once a year or whether it's the open call website, such as many people have put up to say, hey, who out there has a good idea? We definitely need these, but we need the ability also to tap into those people who know. So in Quito, as some of you may know, the Cotopaxi volcano has not erupted for over 100 years, I believe that's right, close to 150 years. It has started spewing ash this August for the first time, putting at risk 120,000 people who live within 12 minutes of that volcano who must be evacuated. But Quito has a small government overwhelmed by the magnitude of the challenge, and they need help with knowing how to plan. So what we can do and what we have been doing is using the web to match Quito, in this case the civil servants there in the planning and open government group, to people in places like Christchurch, in Iceland, in Philippines, and elsewhere, where they have experience with managing disasters and coming up with innovative responses to them. Again, it's not an open call. Quito isn't asking anybody out there have a good idea for how to evacuate 120,000 people. You can't govern a city like that. Instead, it's about matching people with the right set of skills and expertise on topics ranging from evacuation to shelter to public health to help solve a problem. There are a number of policies we have to put in place to enable this. We have to have the tools that allow us to do this kind of matching. But above all, what we have to have is the cultural practice and the ability for us to actually get in the habit of asking questions. We need to be able to move from a world of just Match.com to a world of what I would call People.gov. The ability of our institutions to, in fact, make use of this smart intelligence by asking a question. When I worked for the White House, we tried to experiment with doing this. The hardest part was not finding a platform. There were lots of Q&A sites out there that allowed you to ask a question and get an answer, commonly in use in the private sector when programmers love to ask questions of one another about how to fix their code. What we couldn't find was a single civil servant willing to ask a question. It would be embarrassing to say, I don't know. It would be challenging to take help from the outside. We've come a long way since then. We have a world in which crowdsourcing is acceptable, in which engagement is commonplace, but we have to move to this next level of actually being able to target and pinpoint what people know. PulsePoint, the London Ambulance Corps, and others are beginning to start services based around this principle. What they're looking for is people who have one single skill, the ability to respond to somebody having a heart attack by performing cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR. That's all they want to know, and if you have that skill, you register for the platform, and then thanks to open data, when an emergency call comes in, they are able to geolocate those people with that skill who are near the victim of the heart attack and send somebody to their aid. That means in communities, and now there are over 1,400 of them using PulsePoint, if somebody suffers a heart attack, or in the case of the London Air Ambulance Service, if somebody is involved in an accident, they would typically in the past have to rely on a network of fire, ambulance, and police to respond. This is an area of California which before PulsePoint came in, these dots show you those government first responders. When you add in a network of citizens, when you add the network of citizens, this now becomes the disaster relief and recovery network that becomes possible. When we tap into the skills and abilities, when we can match systematically what people know and what they can do to problems that they can help to solve, that they want to help to solve, when we move past the notion that the only thing people can do is vote and accept the fact that people are smart and they will contribute with a little help of technology to help pair them to the opportunity to serve, that they will help us create better and smarter cities. But we need a lot of experimentation in doing so. Being here in Spain, I can't help but think of the now closed restaurant called El Bulli, once thought of as the greatest restaurant in the world. What made it the greatest restaurant was it was only open 6 months out of the year, because its famous chef would close the restaurant and spend 6 months experimenting with the menu to design the perfect dishes and then open for the next 6 months. Well, we can't run government like El Bulli. We can't close for 6 months and stop delivering services and stop saving lives and stop giving out benefits. We have to stay open. We have to re-engineer the plane while we are flying it, which is not an easy task to do. But it depends upon experimentation, and it depends upon a level of humility and acceptance of the fact that people inside our institutions, companies, governments, etc., are not in possession of the exclusive monopoly on the best ideas. And instead, we must reach out to those outside our borders, those in business, those in universities, those students, those individuals within our own communities, and use technology to connect them better back to our institutions. It is then, when we tap into the data that we have, and more importantly, when we tap into the people that we have, that we will truly create smarter cities. Thank you. So I've been told that we have a few minutes. I don't know that I have answers, so whether it's questions or whether it's comments, I've been told we have a few minutes for discussion, which I hope we might have, and there are some mics here and there. I would love to hear of, if there are not questions, and stories of anybody who has had experience with tapping into the wisdom of the crowd in their own cities or in their own communities. In any language that you choose. Jerry? Here we go. See, if I know you and you're in the front row, I'm going to call on you. So you're next.
So it seems to me, I'm Jerry Halton, and it's great to have you here, Beth, because Beth holds the Jerry Halton Chair in Innovation, so I'm especially proud of her work. So the third question that's on my mind when you talk about using data and civil servants getting engaged and experts is sort of redefining what is it that government ought to deliver. So currently we have a set of things we think of, but if you think of, let's say, housing and transportation's intersection, the better transportation, the more housing's accessible to people brings them closer to their work. So this whole next step of defining how do we understand what we ought to deliver to citizens to really make life better. What do you think about that?
So I'm not sure if I hope everybody could hear. The question was, how should government change what it does, and how does this change what government does for citizens? So I think, Jerry, I'd be interested to hear your own answer to the question, as I'm sure that you have one. In the first place, I think one of the ways this changes what government does is it emphasizes the convening power, and it emphasizes the coordinating power that government is in to both collect and gather data, but also to collect and gather this human intelligence. So you and I have talked before about how to tap into this innovative capacity in universities around New York City, for example. And I think this becomes then one of the functions of government. You need an independent authority to be able to help attract that information from people, but also to help filter and sift that information from people. It's ultimately about government asking the questions, defining we need to reduce traffic congestion, we need to reduce air pollution. Government has to help to articulate those questions and then galvanize those responses from people. That becomes then a very important function of government. It's not about the 20th century bureaucratic notion of being the owner of all the information and the collector of all the information, but the curator of the information that other people might have. So as to how it changes, whether we're worrying about traffic or we're worrying about air pollution, I think we still have to worry about improving the lives of people in our communities, but it places the emphasis on the curation ability of cities, leveraging technology and expertise coming from the private sector, coming from individuals, coming from the academic sector, as well as from civil servants. So, but as we could have a long discussion, I suspect you have answers as well as questions to that. If you want to, where did the mic went to? Oh, The mic went somewhere. There's the mic. If you have the mic, you get to use it.
Yeah, please. I have just one question.
And please introduce yourself.
I am Ali Lari. I'm from a government entity in Dubai. Based quite interesting about the smart cities. I just have a question regarding about the open data and the shared data. Is it being standardized with regards about putting the policies and the standards? Because the topic itself is quite huge, I found it, and to find the policies and standards is quite difficult for the open data and the shared data.
So if I heard, there's some noise in the background, but I think you asked a question about defining the policies around data sharing, essentially.
Yes.
The standing on one foot in 30 seconds, what are the policies and standards we need to set in order to enable the kind of data sharing that I referred to? So it's a very hard question, obviously, and I think one of the ones we're going to see a lot of focus on in the next few years, which is appropriate governance mechanisms for data sharing. Obviously, especially here in Europe, we have tremendous concern for personal privacy and the safeguarding of civil liberties and ensuring personal privacy on the one hand. On the other hand, we have the technologies of data analytics and big data that allow us, when we can mine data at a population level, at an individual level in many cases, to allow us to deliver better, more targeted services that can allow us to find the kind of hotspots that we're talking about, can allow us also to deliver services in ways that safeguard the very same civil liberties we're trying to protect. Quick example, in the United States, President Obama has made the reduction of the number of people in prison one of his top priorities. As you know, we have an oversized prison population. We over-criminalize in the United States, and we put too many people in prison. One of the ways we can reduce that number is by using data. And so that requires some adjustment from a world in which we typically talk about the world of transparency versus privacy to a world in which we have to think about trusted frameworks and responsible use of data and data sharing in ways that protect civil liberties. In other words, using sometimes technology for anonymization on the one hand, using trusted and secure data enclaves, using policies that ensure access to data only for authorized individuals and researchers, for example. So it's a combination of policy and technical solutions, but also a significant amount of public debate and discussion that we need to make new choices about when data sharing is appropriate. So there's work going on, for example, the UN is doing a lot of work on trying to develop these frameworks for data sharing in the humanitarian relief and disaster relief arena to ensure that, again, we have access to the data that we need when we need it while safeguarding civil liberties. So there's no one answer to this yet, except to say that there is a large quantity of data that can and should be open and freely on the web, that has no implications for personal privacy or national security, and that should be open. There are other categories of data where we first need to know what we have, and then to have a discussion about how we make it accessible. And it may be about making it accessible rather than making it open. And then there's another category of data, which is the data about me, where we have to develop the technologies and the frameworks to give me back my own data about me, my health data, my personal files, so that I can make smarter, better choices. So it's my data on the one hand, trusted, shared, accessible, but responsible uses of accessible data, and then open data on the other hand. So that's the work, I think, ahead. I think we have time do we have time for one more question? Last one, yes.
Cool. Hey, Beth. My name is Charlie. I'm from the city of Quito and co-founder of Quito's Innovation Lab. I loved your quote about getting people smarter, not necessarily smart cities, the Nesta quote. Something that we've done in Quito is we have mobile innovation labs, containers that we can actually move and put them in neighborhoods when we can get right into the social fabric of people of the neighborhood and understand their needs. I was wondering if you have any projects like it, because I believe that once that data at the cloud level is not that useful, it's only useful when you get down to the people level.
So the data is useful when it gets closer to the closer we combine, we link the data to the people. And this comes back to the notion that what we're trying to do is to gather granular level intelligence from people about people. And I think that's where projects like what you're doing in Quito are going to be exciting, because it's not just social innovation from the bottom up, but it combines innovation from government and the policy setting from government with the kind of bottom-up innovation that's coming from the labs and the fab labs, and in this case, the social innovation labs. So I think the answer is yes. It's more of a comment than a question. Is that the more that we can think about not only population-level data collected by government, but also collecting data from citizens, gathered by citizens, sometimes using their mobile phones to report on conditions in their own communities and their own streets and their own blocks, that we both get at that situational awareness, that intelligence from people. We get more granular level data about our cities, and we also help to increase the engagement level and the legitimacy of the processes that we create by making citizens co-creators of the data as well as the subjects of the data. So I think we'll be watching with excitement what happens in Quito. So I want to thank you very, very much, and I think my time is up. Thank you.